Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Courtney Morris. She's an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. Hi, Courtney. Ferguson police have released CCTV footage of what they say is proof that 18-year-old Tyrone Harris Jr. was armed and pointing a gun at officers. The African-American teenager was shot multiple times over weekend protests in Ferguson to mark the first anniversary of the killing of Harris's friend, Michael Brown. Harris remains in the hospital in critical condition. Meanwhile, a group of white and heavily armed men calling themselves the Oath Keepers descended on Ferguson this week, claiming to want to protect businesses from protesters and also to provide security for reporters, with the website Infowars.com known for its conspiracy-related stories. The state of emergency in Ferguson remains in place for now after hundreds of people were arrested over the past several days. Well, Courtney, what do you make of the footage showing Harris wielding a gun that police released, and also how the Oath Keepers were treated? It was amazing to see photos of them carrying these massive rifles next to African-American protesters wearing T-shirts that read "Unarmed Civilian." Courtney, we're having trouble hearing you. We are going to call you on the phone, so do bear with us. Courtney Morris is our Newsflash guest expert, and she's going to talk to us about the story that's unfolding right now in Ferguson. And actually, it appears as though the emergency that was declared by St. Louis County Executive may be lifted soon. It does remain in place, and over the last 24 hours, there have not been arrests. However, the protests that began over the weekend and continue through today, continue through the last several days, are quite large and quite active on the ground. Courtney, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So what do you make of the video that was released, and also of Harris pointing a gun, but also the way in which these Oath Keepers were treated?
Well, I think that there's a lot that's really very wrong with this picture. The first is that, the video footage that we see of Tyrone Harris is really problematic, because although it does show him wielding a weapon, we never see him actually fire the weapon, nor do we see the plainclothes police officers that he allegedly fired at. And none of those officers had vehicle or body cam. So, we're basically being asked once again to take the police officer's word about what took place and what led to Tyrone Harris being shot, which is, quite a lot to ask at this point, I think. But I think the presence of the Oath Keepers in Ferguson and the freedom that they seem to enjoy to occupy public space, literally armed to the teeth with handguns and assault rifles, for me, really shows that not all citizens truly have the right to bear arms or protest peacefully, for that matter. It's frankly outrageous that a group of middle-aged white men can walk around carrying assault rifles and be treated as nothing more than a nuisance by the police, while unarmed black civilians are being racially profiled and wrongfully arrested on suspicion of being in possession of firearms in a state with some of the most lax open carry laws in the country. So for me, the bottom line, I think, is really that this is a blatant and obvious double standard that shows that we don't all enjoy the same rights and privileges and protections of citizenship under the Constitution.
And then a new poll just released of presidential hopefuls in New Hampshire has a stunning result. Bernie Sanders has surged ahead of Hillary Clinton with a 7-point lead. The poll was conducted by Franklin Pierce University and the Boston Herald. A similar poll by the same group in March found the poll numbers almost reversed. Sanders has so far drawn more than 100,000 people to his public rallies in cities around the country, but a Washington Post blog this morning warned against reading too much into the numbers, asking, could Clinton fill an arena in Los Angeles if she wanted to? Of course she could, unquestionably, end of quote. Meanwhile, activists with Black Lives Matter yesterday attempted to confront Clinton in the same way that they've confronted Sanders. But her high security stood in the way, and Clinton instead savvily met with a group of 5 activists privately. Courtney, how do you explain these high poll numbers for Clinton versus Sanders? Are you surprised?
I think that there's some surprise among certain political analysts that Bernie Sanders is doing so well in his campaign for the Democratic nomination. But I do think that I tend to err on the side of cautious optimism, and I think, we have to continue to remember that Hillary Clinton is an extremely powerful figure in the Democratic Party. She has all of the social capital of the Clinton brand and some of its baggage. And she has campaign funding from some of the most powerful lobbies in the country, right? The oil and gas industries, prison industries, Israel lobby. So it's not surprising that I think that Sanders appeals to more progressive Democrats who are understandably wary of Hillary Clinton's corporate loyalties, right? But I think the real question is whether Bernie Sanders can sway the broader public in a general election, and that is not so clear, despite his growing popularity among certain segments of the Democratic Party.
And finally, the global human rights organization Amnesty International has voted to decriminalize sex work after a months-long global campaign during which sex workers and their advocates lobbied the group hard. International delegates of Amnesty voted yesterday for a resolution that states Amnesty International should develop a policy that supports the full decriminalization of all aspects of consensual sex work. The policy will also call on states to ensure that sex workers enjoy full and equal legal protection from exploitation, trafficking, and violence. The prestigious medical journal Lancet and the World Health Organization had already recommended similar approaches. Although Amnesty International has no policy-making power, the organization has massive global influence, according to Common Dreams. However, some people, quote, argued for Amnesty to instead advocate the Swedish model, which criminalizes purchasers and third-party sellers of sex, but not sex workers themselves. Courtney, what do you make of this resolution that Amnesty passed after strong pressure from many groups?
Well, I mean, I think this is a very positive step. I mean, of course, it remains to be seen how effective they're actually going to be in persuading countries to change their policies around sex work. But I think that supporting decriminalization is incredibly important. One, because it diminishes some of the social stigma that's associated with people who are engaging in consensual sex work. And two, because I think it allows sex workers to demand the kinds of protections that they deserve as workers. It allows them to organize themselves as workers in order to protect themselves from some of the dangers that go along with that kind of labor. And ultimately, I think when you criminalize consensual sex work, what it does is that it pushes those laborers into the shadows, and it forces sex workers to work under dangerous and precarious conditions.
Right.
But decriminalization really, I think, separates them from people who are being trafficked and allows us to be able to more effectively serve people who are being trapped in sex work who don't want to be, and to support those people who are doing that work of their own volition.
Courtney, thanks as always for joining us. We'll talk to you next week. Courtney Morris is an assistant professor of African American and Women's Studies at Penn State University. We'll be right back.